That could have been really, really bad had that burned over.
Yeah.
And
But
so,
also a very good cautionary note for the people that are using those sources for information is to have a layered communications plan, so that if step A goes down, you go to B, and if B goes down, you go to C, and by the time you run out of options, hopefully, we're either at the end of the world or you didn't plan very well.
sure. And so I think we might have discussed this in the past, not necessarily it being a great idea to always rely on other people's communications equipment. Always have some sort of simplex option.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
Yard Sale was saying that Trump spoke today about possibly closing FEMA. Don't get too excited, Drew, and just giving the funds directly to the states so they can deal, I guess, with disasters much faster. I think he was talking about either ending it or maybe something follows in its place. I don't know.
I don't know how you can do that without Congress.
Didn't Jimmy Carter kind of create this into existence with an executive order?
I thought FEMA came about after 9/11, or is my math not mathing?
I think after 9/11, a lot of things got placed under the Department Homeland Security umbrella.
That's what I'm thinking.
And same with like the ATF, right? They were IRS prior to that, and then they became Homeland
DOJ
Security.
now.
Yeah, FEMA's been around for a while. They just consolidated everything.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of FEMA. Unfortunately, I look at because I do believe that if there is any legitimate reason for government to exist, again, small libertarian, it has to be to like take care of the people. And I don't mean micromanage their lives, but in times of great calamity or in times of situations that community and individual cannot deal with the problem because of the size and the scope, that is a legitimate argument could be made that that's government's place to step in and be like, listen, guys, y'all cannot rebuild this entire town by yourselves. Let us come in and help. But at the end of the day, I keep going back to this idea that if I personally am going to like sign off on that happening, I got to see some results. And so far, FEMA doesn't seem to be doing a great job at managing emergencies. So I have to ask, is that a problem with the organization, with the mission statement, with the leadership, or just a complete lack of accountability?
Just
either way.
Bureaucracy. It's all the bureaucracy involved in it. I mean, there's so much red tape.
Mm-hmm.
So much.
Well, we need not look much further past their own mission statement, which does not have emergency preparedness even at near the top of the list. It's diversity and inclusion is their primary mission. Good grief. So I know that they provide some flood insurance. Go ahead, Jared.
I'm sorry. I was just asking if that's changed in the past week.
No, that's a great point. I don't know. But I know they provide flood insurance because not a lot of private insurers provide that for a lot of these high risk areas.
Is it flood insurance or flood relief?
I think they provide insurance. As far as I know.
I would have to look into that. I'm in a 100-year flood zone, so not anything that would affect me directly.
Well, let's see. It looks like this is, I guess, the region's worst fire disaster in history. And they were estimating that economic losses were between $250 billion and $275 billion. Of course, there's been some fires that have cropped up in the last few days, which is probably added to that number, but I don't know. I don't know if is it wise to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just completely scrap FEMA, or like you guys are saying, like, is there a more efficient way to retool that organization so they can actually be maybe more helpful?
Well, the two things that come to mind actually don't even approach your question, which is fair. The first two things that come to my mind are, how much money have we sent out of the country last year in foreign aid? Because $250 billion feels like that's an amount of money we could have raised if we hadn't given it away to the rest of the son of a bitchin' world all the time. And the other thing that comes to my mind pretty immediately is, I wonder how much money in in federal income tax LA County has kicked up to the Fed. Because if that number is less than 250 billion, I kind of feel like maybe the solution is just less government, less taxation, let the people in the community keep their money, and they can rebuild this whole place by themselves.
Sounding awfully libertarian there.
Yeah, I know. It's a curse. It's a curse, guys. I'm just saying, like, I credit a lot of me and my family's ability to weather natural disasters down here on the Gulf Coast to the fact that, like, we planned for FEMA to not be here. Because for Hurricane Ida, we didn't see FEMA. I'm not saying they weren't around, but they didn't come to my house. I took care of my own stuff. We had some family come in to provide some extra manpower. We had a lot of things prepared ahead of time. We took command of our own situation and we fixed it. And I think if FEMA is going to have a purpose moving forward, like Drew said, part of this message has to be that y'all need to prepare ahead of time, because, well, you know, what's the age-old saying? Is an ounce of prevention a pound of cure? We all know that there's no secret here. If every household were told up front, these are the things we really highly recommend you do. And I mean, you could even do some big government tomfoolery and say, if you spend money on like emergency preparations, if it's this, or this, you could write that off your taxes at the end of the year, or something like that to offset the cost to low-income households. But people have got to start understanding that if you don't take command of this yourself, if you don't take responsibility for yourself, waiting for the government to show up and help is a really bad solution.
That's what 95% of the people in this country do, is they wait for the government to come help them.
And here's the thing, small libertarian. I'm not saying the government's full of evil people that just want to watch people starve to death after a hurricane or a wildfire. But what I'm saying is exactly what I said in the first place. When there's 100 households who've been affected by a natural disaster, and there's 2 FEMA officials to help 100 households, there's too much problem and not enough people to deal with it. So people need to start being a little bit responsible for themselves.
You know, as an example, one of our community Facebook groups around here, a lady was complaining that her power's been out for 3 days, but she didn't have the forethought to even call the power company and let them know. I mean, come on now, you got to take some kind of responsibility. They're not going to just know that your power's out. It could be just a couple houses. It could just be her house. It could be the whole street. If they don't get some kind of report about it, they're not going to know. So again, it goes back to personal responsibility.
So in the absence of people taking personal responsibility, I still don't think that justifies a massive federal bureaucratic leviathan that FEMA has become. An ineffective leviathan. It still just doesn't make sense to me.
But to me, Drew, that's the key word, is ineffective. And that's what I would say to Terrence. If they're effective at positively influencing the lives of people suffering from a natural disaster, and we could argue about what effective looks like, but I think we're all the 4 of us are agreeing with each other, they're not effective.
No.
So if they're not effective,
Agreed.
it doesn't matter what their mission statement is, they shouldn't exist. Like, yes, Terrence, throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the baby has 3 eyeballs and no ears, and, you know, is obviously not doing well, so pitched out with the bathwater.
Well,
I mean, the left loves abortion, so I don't know why. I mean, sorry, we're taking this analogy too far.
Wow, we went spicy and dark real fast.
Indeed. Well, I mean, in the entire history of FEMA,
Well, FEMA was created in 1979 too, by the way.
yeah.
Okay.
So have they had any success? Is there a time where you can point to FEMA and say they did a kick-ass job? And
Okay, they provide good education. They provide good for. If you take a look at their online education programs and some of their curriculum, it actually is not that terrible. But it also, that little part doesn't justify the massive bureaucratic nightmare we see.
Not that terrible.
So we had the
is a hell
earthquake
of a
here
low
in
bar,
Virginia in
dude.
2011, and FEMA came in and to the schools, because we lost our high school and a couple elementary schools, and they provided classroom trailers to the school district here, and they had those trailers for 4 or 5 years until they can get the schools rebuilt.
FEMA provided that?
Yes.
I have to say though, why Why would
Well,
we
again,
need
I
the
mean, they're not
federal
supposed
government
to come
to
in
provide
and
trailers?
save you. They're pretty much there to help you, apply for the aid that you need, and I guess maybe supply materials for survivors of natural disasters. But that's about it. I mean, they are a bureaucracy. That's the point of FEMA.
So, Phil, am I summarizing you correctly? If we actually saw some value return for the amount of money we spend on that agency, then maybe it would be more palatable.
I would at least at that point be willing to entertain
Okay,
the idea
I'm
of
with you.
FEMA
Yeah, I
being a
hear
good
you.
idea. Not saying
So-
they are, but what I'm saying is that from the position we're at today and what I'm seeing, what I have seen, like back for Hurricane Katrina when FEMA was really intensely in this area following that disaster, from what I'm seeing, the whole agency can go away, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
If I'm going to entertain keeping them around, they got to do something useful, and I'm not seeing it. So ask me how I feel about most other three-letter agencies, and I'll probably say about the same thing. Y'all aren't doing anything useful. You're doing things I don't really approve of. It's just take them all and put them in the circular file.
Well, I mean,
So-
I've never had to deal with them directly, so it's really easy for me to sit here and play devil's advocate. But I mean,
so
you
my
guys
experience
have-
with them as a contractor from the inside in 2004, 2005, the hurricane seasons, it was the dumbest time of my life. Those people are horrible. They're just not functional human beings.
So my best friend for 25 years is now my brother-in-law, and that's another lengthy story that's got a funny twist to it. But he contracted for FEMA after Hurricane Katrina, running fuel trucks in and out, pulling trailers.
Okay.
And yeah, some of the stories he's told me, like, I am not shocked they don't do a good job at managing things. There's this disconnect between common sense and the way they think.
So
But
is
that's
it
true
just
of
like
most
fraud,
bureaucracies.
waste, and abuse?
It's more like, have you ever known you've heard of the term malicious compliance, right? Where a person, like, they're told to do something and they think it's dumb, so they do exactly what they're told to the letter, knowing it's going to turn out horribly.
Mm-hmm.
These guys don't do malicious compliance. They do stupid compliance. Like, if you tell them to do something, they'll do it exactly the way they were told to do it, even if doing it that way doesn't accomplish the spirit of what they were told to do. But they do it the way they were told to do it because they were told to do it. Because to do it otherwise gets them in trouble with their bosses, who says, "Why did you do it that way?" And if your response is, "Because the way you told me to do it was stupid," they don't care. They want it done the way they told you to do it.
Yes.
And then
And
you
by
have
the
to
way,
have a 40-hour
corporations to do
training
that
class
where-
on how to relearn how to do that one simple task.
Yes. And understand, none of that is a dig at FEMA. That is a dig across the board at most bureaucracies, because they all end up devolving down to that.
Is that
Is-
your FEMA issued flashlight there, Drew?
Yes.
That
And-
looks
Sorry, I
like
didn't
something
mean to
had
cut
in
you off, Phil. Go
1980s.
if anyone is unfamiliar with this story, please check out my channel for my story about the FEMA issued dogfighting weapon that I was given in 2005. After Hurricane Katrina, we were told that there were dogs roaming around and eating people, and I don't know to what extent that was true, but it was clearly not a safe situation. And because we were working for the federal government, they said couldn't have firearms, couldn't have pepper spray. So I said, well, what are you expecting us to do if we're attacked by a pack of feral dogs? They said, don't worry, we're going to get you a flashlight and a clipboard. You shove the clipboard in their mouth and you beat them on the head with the flashlight. Like, whatever, man, that's okay. I'm open to it. Fine. This is the weapon, the dog fighting weapon they gave me. This is a plastic Walmart flashlight. Okay. This is the type of human being that runs that company and makes decisions. Okay. What kind, are you going to beat a chihuahua to death with this? This makes no sense.
Did you implement your malicious compliance with that?
Yes, there you go.
Well, I mean, I'm telling the world the truth about FEMA. This is a FEMA self-defense weapon. I don't even know what else to say about the clipboard. Also, it was not like a metal clipboard that could actually do some damage. It was a flimsy single subject spiral bound paper notebook that you'd have in school for your back to school supplies. So, this says everything I need to know about FEMA. So, maybe we shuck them down to just what they're good at, and we throw the rest of this away. I don't know.
Throw that in the same trash can as the whole agency.
I mean, maybe the trash can can be big enough for the ATF and the FBI and I don't know, the Office of Government, whatever. Anyway.
I have the simplest fix to
2,600
this.
agencies we can choose from.
Oh, don't tease me don't threaten me with a good time, Jared. I have a really simple solution to this, and it involves, a lack of reality because it'll never happen, but it's a fun thought. I think we take the person who dreamt that nonsense up, Drew, and we put them in the middle of New Orleans with a clipboard and a flashlight in the dark and be like, do you feel safe and secure?
I don't even know if this could illuminate the dark very well. It's like an incandescent 2AA. Jesus.
That's sad.
Anyway.
So speaking of disaster stories, so the pack of wild dogs thing, that wasn't really true though, right?
I'd never heard that, and I was in Belle Chase, which is southwest of New Orleans, for months.
If you're being told though, this information that dogs are attacking people, and you don't take it seriously, and your people do get attacked, what is that? What type of leadership is that?
I couldn't tell you because I was in the National Guard, and I literally told every one of my guys, if you walk off of this base that we're operating from, you better have a sidearm on your hip or a rifle in your hands. Go with God, do what you got to do, what you're supposed to do.
Summer Side of Life says, when Drew said clipboard, I figured he was going to say the dogs would have to fill out 5 pages of forms to get a dog.
Beautiful.
All right. Well done. Well done.
Well played. Well played.
But the reason I bring up the pack of dogs is, it seems like with every disaster, there's always rumors, things like that. And one of them this time around for the California wildfires was that the fire hydrants were broken. And I, tried to do some digging and research, and turns out that's not entirely accurate. So I found a couple of articles. This first one is from the New York Post. And so I guess there's a reservoir, and it's about 117 million gallons. It's the Santa Ynez Reservoir. And I guess that reservoir serves areas like the Palisades neighborhood. Unfortunately, it was emptied prior to this wildfire because it was undergoing some repairs. There was a cover that was torn, and basically when the blaze started, that was not available. And it looks like Taylor just joined us. Welcome, sir. Can you hear us?
I don't think he can hear us.
We can hear him.
Yeah.
Turn my headphones up.
Can you hear us now? Might have to do this like a Verizon commercial.
I know, right?
So that claim
while
about
he's
the fire
figuring out
hydrants, that doesn't even make sense on its face. And I think just even a little bit of discernment could probably guard somebody against something like that, because for all fire hydrants to be broken at the same time, that just doesn't make sense. They're individual standpipe devices in the ground, and I could believe that 1 or 2 were broken, but every single one, that just doesn't make sense, especially with how frequently fire departments test fire hydrants.
Yeah, and
And a lot of it
Los
was
Angeles.
just, the demand was far greater than the supply was able to provide.
Yeah,
That makes
well,
sense.
and that's what the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power was saying, basically, that the hydrants were not able to keep up with the demand, and they were basically saying that any assertion that the hydrants were broken is basically false and misleading.
But the question is, we just got through talking about how this huge reservoir was taken offline for maintenance. Could that have impacted the availability of water for these hydrants?
I'm sure it reduced it to some degree, but they also have contingencies in place to be able to supply the water that was providing prior to it being taken out.
That's fair. I guess my thought process is like, when the best time to do Army guy, when the best time to do maintenance on your rifle is? When you're in the middle of getting shot at. Like what's the best time to drain a water reservoir? In the middle of wildfire season.
I think to be fair, not to argue with you, but they drained it like last spring, like spring of 2024 or something like that, didn't they? And
Or
so it
20
has
I think it
been
might have been
drained for
23.
whatever. It was
Yeah.
quite a while ago, and it just
It's been a
hasn't been
while.
fixed since.
I
So,
looked at
but then
the image on Google Earth, and it's drained in the Google Earth image. And I can't remember when the date was that the image was taken, but it had been a while.
This sounds like a teaching moment, I guess. I know
Well, and-
nothing about fighting wildfires, guys. I'm not a firefighter. Never have been. Don't really want to be. I'm running into burning buildings doesn't sound like a great idea to me, but I respect the people that do it.
It's a lot of fun.
I'm glad you think it's fun. My brother's a firefighter. I have friends that are firefighters. That's not my career path. I'm just saying that, like, anytime you get into a situation like this where some part of your emergency preparedness plan failed, it's a teaching moment. You have to be able to look back at things and honestly say, this worked, this did, and what could I do better next time? And the answer is almost never nothing.
You know, excuse me. Along the lines of these reservoirs, I mean, they drain reservoirs across the country all the time, especially in the wintertime. They drop the water levels down so they can do maintenance on them. And I'm sure they do the same out there. Last year, they had an influx of water, of rainfall and snow melt out in California. And they were having to let it go because they didn't have enough storage for it all. And I'm sure, Taylor, can you hear us now, Taylor?
No, I can, yeah.
Okay. And I'm sure you can pipe in on that a little bit better than I could, being that you do some wildland stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate part is that the reservoirs are what they are. Once they're full, there's nowhere
That's
to
all
put
you
it.
got. Yeah.
That's it. It can rain as much as it wants. Once they're full, there's no overflow. You know, they're at capacity.
So it also might be helpful to explain that hydrants are really more of a structure fire suppression tool, and we're talking about wildland urban interface. And so what might be useful for suppressing the fire in a one or a couple structures is not necessarily set up to be the best tool for a massive zip code wide fire. And so luckily the wildland fire services are experts at water shuttling with tankers and tenders, water tenders, which apparently on the East Coast you call them tankers. That boggles my mind, but
Water tenders are tankers out here.
And so there was a lot of great videos, a lot of great footage of scoopers and helicopters dipping out of the ocean. Okay, that's great. They're right next to a gigantic source of water, but then some ass wagon fucking flew a drone into one of the Canadian scoopers and grounded their whole fleet. So then they have nothing except shovels. So I don't know what to say about that other than the community there has a little bit of introspection to do about how they support their first responders.
There's
So one
always
of the
going to be
things
that one idiot that screws it up for everybody else.
Right.
One of the things I thought was interesting about that was, I'm surprised California hadn't thought about this ahead of time, was, so when I was in, FDNY, just after the terrorist attacks, all of the new rigs for FDNY, if you look at them, they have a massive steamer connection on their pump panels. And the idea behind that was, obviously New York City does not have a problem with water flow because there's a hydrant every, half a block. When they designed those engines, the thought process behind it was if the terrorists tried to take out the water supply for New York, that every engine would just be able to go to the East River or the Hudson River, and they would be able to supply the entire city because every engine has this massive pump on it that they could just draft and do the city's water supply from that. So I'm curious to see if California adapts something from this point on that, they could rely more on the ocean than just in their infrastructure.
They've talked about using the ocean water for that. I guess you'd probably have to desalinate all that water, though, because I don't know that you want to dump a bunch of salt water all over everything all the time.
I saw that argument online that the salt water is going to wreck the ability for plants to grow back. I think
It happened in Idiocracy.
Rondo has what
Well,
plants crave. Nice.
It's a valid concern, but also a gigantic burn scar is fairly problematic for the environment as well. So I don't know. I think you're looking at the least harmful option. I'm curious what effect a ton of salt water has on pumps and equipment. I imagine all that stuff's going to have to get ripped apart at some point in the future and rehabbed.
I mean, you have, if you're going to use it, you're going to use it for that operation, and that's it. So you have to do a good job of flushing it out. I mean, listen, if somebody's in the, in the market of building fire pumps, maybe something if you could, Line-X them somehow, or make them, anti-corrosive could be a huge sell for some custom apparatus.
Well, I mean, you got to think about it. Anything that's marine rated is going to be somewhat resistant to salt water. It kind of has to be. So, I mean, that technology exists. But to me, this always comes back to the least bad you can manage. And if I have to pick between let a city burn and douse it in salt water, the after effects of the salt water feels like we can mitigate that somehow when we're not in danger of burning down a whole community. Like, maybe that's me being short-sighted. I'm just saying, like, at a certain point, when you have no good solution, it doesn't mean you do nothing. It just means you pick the least bad and go with it.
So Summer Side of Life says the water pumping stations would know what water levels they have, so whom there was not sounding the alarm. I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. Do we know for sure that no one sounded the alarm? I imagine the alarm was sounded. It's just what on earth are you going to do about it? And I recall from one of those articles, they said that the supply was considered strong. So they had the normal amount of supply to those hydrants, but the outflow was such that the pressure just wasn't there. And they weren't able to augment with that drinking water reservoir because it didn't exist. It was down for maintenance and has been for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know what size supply lines they have underground there. I mean, I'm sure through the cities it's 30-inch lines, 36-inch main supply lines. But when you get further out from the center of the cities, those supply lines get smaller in diameter. So if you're having a 10-inch supply line or a 6-inch supply line that a hydrant's connected to, and then you hook up a 5-inch or a 6-inch supply line from the engine to that hydrant, you're virtually taking that entire 6-inch line out of service for anything else because all the water's going to that one engine.
Well, the other thing too was, I don't know if you guys got into it, was in that last video that I did, kind of regarding this. One of the things that I addressed was the fact of, sprinkler systems in that area are mandated. Well, once the house burns down and the utilities aren't shut off, now you have all these, water systems literally just pumping water to nowhere. So you talk about killing your supply when you take blocks and blocks of houses, even though it's only residential, that volume adds up and can deplete their mains really quick.
Oh, I know. Down here on the Gulf Coast, we just got there dealing with our own little snow apocalypse, and we started running our faucets Tuesday morning as the temperature started diving below freezing. And by Wednesday morning, like, bear in mind, we left them trickling. We didn't turn them off until it got back above freezing. After 24 hours, my wife and I both noticed that the water pressure in the house was starting to fall a little bit. Like, not dangerously, but it was noticeable. And I told my wife, I'm like, there's almost no way we're the only family in this area smart enough to run your faucets when it's down in the low 20s on the Gulf Coast, So it's just one of those situations where, like, when you got that many households, even trickling faucets, yeah, it's going to have an impact. It has to. I guess my thought process is.
Point of order: when you say Gulf Coast, you're talking about the Gulf of America, right?
He is.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
That which you may deem it is the Gulf. But at the end of the day, if this is just one of those situations where, like, there is no malice in play here, there was no bureaucratic stupidity in play here, this is truly the best efforts were made, and the emergency was so severe it outstripped our best efforts, then the teaching moment is, do we need to bump up those efforts? Do we need to bump up the preparedness? Do we need to have more water reservoirs? Do we need to do those things? Like, admitting failure is not a death sentence. It's just an admission that we could have done something better had we had the benefit of hindsight, which now we do. And the answer is that level of preparedness is just not demanded given the relative infrequency of a wildfire this severe, then that's the answer. But I mean, this whole situation to me is like every emergency. It is an opportunity to look back at what was done right, what was done wrong, what could be done better. And sometimes the answer is everything worked the way it was supposed to. But the way it was supposed to work wasn't good.
Probably a couple
for that area, whether it's the Palisade fires or your 20-degree snowstorm out there in the Gulf.
Yeah, I mean, 9 inches of snowfall in southeast Louisiana has been called a once in a lifetime experience for us. The most I'd ever seen before this was 3 inches, and even that was like once every 10 years.
I don't know.
But they're not going to invest millions or even billions of dollars into infrastructure for plows and trucks and snow removal equipment and salt. And
Those plow trucks would rot into the pavement waiting to be used, because that's just, but that is one of those situations where it's like, what was our mitigation strategy? Close the roads, and all you couillons stay your butts at home until the snow goes away. That's
it's going to be an inconvenience for a couple days, and then it'll be back to business as normal.
It wasn't even that inconvenient. I had a humidor full of cigars and like pounds of coffee on the shelf. Hell, I just sat here at the house and remote worked and had a great time. My daughter built a snowman in the front yard.
I don't know what the containment is, but last time I checked, there was another new fire, and I think there might be, maybe one more besides this one, but another fire broke out, the Hughes fire that's north of LA, and last time I checked, it was about 14% containment as of Wednesday. I don't know what it is now, but that one burned about 10,000 acres. So this problem's clearly not going away. And I guess that kind of leads us to, something Drew was talking about, which is involving family and comms planning. But it's hard to make it interesting for family members and friends sometimes and get people involved in this kind of stuff because it's not interesting to many people. Maybe this will change some things in California, perhaps, but I don't know. Drew, do you have any, thoughts on ways to make comms planning and disaster planning more appealing?
Well, I think situations like this, especially if we're in them, but also if they don't exactly directly touch us, can be leveraged to explain the importance of prior preparation, and communication just being one aspect of that preparation. But that just so happens to be the topic that the comms syndicate here prioritizes. So what I hear from a lot of guys is they try, and their wives are just not into it. They're just not interested. And I think that's really unfortunate, because communication is something women are so good at. And I just think it's a real shame that a lot of them won't, or are unwilling, or just not interested enough to get into communications. I think that what am I trying to say? We've got to, as husbands, we've got to figure out how to speak that language to them, to make them see the value of that, to get them interested in what we're doing. And I think that starts with a conversation about what about this do you not like, and what can we do to fix that? With my wife, she really doesn't like talking on the radio. She doesn't like people hearing her voice. There were some guys who were kind of jerks to her on the radio at one point, and she's just like, I'm not interested in that at all. So what I've done is create a system where we can text with each other, and we can cover vast distances with just digital modes on communication. Luckily, there's a lot of turnkey devices on the market now that use APRS, and with GMRS, there are some devices that you can just text message over them. And so there's a lot of options now that we can mitigate some of those concerns. But it starts with that conversation to try to figure out what the roadblocks are to recruit them. I also think that it's kind of a two-way street. If you're a guy who is not interested in anything that your wife does, I don't think it's reasonable to them to expect that she's going to be interested in the stuff that you're interested in too. And of course, she's never going to be just as enthusiastic about all the nerdy radio stuff that we're all into. And that's okay. I don't think it's reasonable to expect our wives to be that interested, because if they were, then we'd be married to dudes, right? And there's a word for that. So those are my thoughts on this topic. And I'm actually really curious to hear what you guys have to think about this as well.
It's not that much different in the tactical milsim community. They want to go out and do all the sexy shooting stuff and run all these drills and simulations, but they don't have a clue on how to talk on the radio, or even have an interest in talking on the radio to further their game on that. No,
I mean, at least in my experience, like part of part of the hitch, and I haven't just seen this with like girlfriends, spouses. I've seen this like just generally in the preparedness community. But like I see a lot of the recalcitrance and the difficulty being how complicated this subject can get. We all know the minute you start pecking away at ham radio is a topic that gets I'm gonna draw a comparison to like ammunition reloading, which I do. It's deceivingly simple on the face of it, and the more you learn, the bigger the subject gets. The more into it you get, the more you realize is out there to learn. And it can get very overwhelming for the person that's not really emotionally invested in it as like a hobby or as a methodology. So what I always try to espouse is I'm like, listen, boys and girls, if we treat it like a tool, not like a hobby, and we try to make it as not stupid proof, but if we try to make it as simple as possible so it is a tool, why are cell phones so ubiquitous? Because everybody has one, they're not that hard to use, and everybody can figure it out. So if we can take radios as a subject and break it down so that the layperson can very quickly pick it up, start to use it, gain confidence in it, and we reduce that learning curve, now you're going to get buy-in much faster. Like my family, we don't use radios just goofing around the house. We take radios with us when we go camping. When we're camping, I encourage my wife and daughter, here is a radio. Keep your cell phone if you want, but here's a radio, and this is what I'm going to use to call y'all or talk y'all if we're scattered around a little bit. I keep a radio in my pack when we're going on hikes. I've usually got it tuned up to like NOAA channels or tuned up to a local repeater if I've got one handy. It's all about not pushing it on them, but at the same time, like having it be present and having it be accessible. And when we're in those situations where cell phones stop working, both my wife and daughter know immediately, go get the radios out of the bag, turn them on, make sure they're charged, and let's start talking to each other, because that's what we have to devolve to.
There was I think Starlink is probably a good option for a lot of this stuff. I don't know how many of you guys here have it. I know at least one of you probably does. I think, Taylor, you have it, don't you?
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
And so I assume you take this with you on deployments where you...
Like with the wildfire stuff, I do, and I was actually surprised. Number one, how many people don't have it, especially those that live in those regions. You know, I'm working with guys that live out in California and out in these western states, and this is their life. And when we're there, you know, you literally get, you know, we're you're usually stationed somewhere, so we're doing our thing, and you get the division supervisors and whatnot coming to you to want to park next to you so they can get on your Starlink, so they can have some internet. You know, and it's a good way to make friends, because everybody just wants to come hang out with you. But you know, I think now my biggest thing is, you know, last year traveling with that thing, it was the original Starlink. So, you know, the Pelican case is 3 feet by 2 feet by 8 inches. And now with this Starlink Mini, man, the fact that the router is embedded into it, it's a game changer. Now you're going into a 12 by 12 Pelican case, and everything's self-contained. It's going to be, I'm definitely getting a Mini for this year.
I was looking at that one. It looks pretty cool. It looks like there's a couple plans though. So I guess from what I could tell, like one's $50 a month, and then you get 50 gigs of data, and then another one's 165 if you want unlimited. But I guess you have the option of maybe pausing your service, because I think that particular roam plan is just for, you know, backpacking, camping. Actually, you know what? I have a graphic.
You got to pay like $10 or $15 a month while it's dormant now, right?
Oh, do you? I don't know. I didn't.
I think there's still a fee. I don't think it just completely goes away, but it's much lower than the 50.
With mine, I don't pay anything for why it's sitting here dormant. I don't know if I got in, you know, early enough, but it doesn't cost me anything.
It's just a rumor I heard.
When it's paused, yeah.
The thing that seems like a little bit of a deterrent is the startup cost for the equipment, because isn't the mini dish like $600?
It is. And what's weird is they were doing a sale in Europe for it for like $350, but the sale never reached us here.
You know what? I saw a lot of guys on the last fire season. That had the little devices. They were recouping their costs by renting out their password for the day. They were charging like $10 a day for the password, and people were glad to pay it.
I was charging 20 for the week, so that's pretty.
Yeah, there you
good.
go. Make them an excellent deal.
Yep.
Here's a list of their pricing that I found. And that's the other thing that I've noticed online is there's a lot of discrepancies about like what the costs are and stuff. But it looks like for residential, it's $120. But the one that I was interested was the $50 a month for the roam because I wanted to see if I could basically take the mini dish and then connect that to, I don't know, maybe have JS8 call running out in the field or something.
Is it packable, like in a small backpack?
I believe so. From
The
what I
Mini
could
is,
tell,
for
yeah.
sure. Yep. And I forget who was one of the guys was talking about running it off the battery, and you know, with it doesn't, for what it's doing, it doesn't even draw a whole lot, even if it has to go, because it automatically senses if it starts to build up ice on the panel, it has a heating element in it where it will automatically heat up to de-ice itself.
Oh wow, on the Mini.
On the full one, I'm assuming on the
Yeah,
Mini,
yeah.
it's gotta have the same
I have
thing.
a battery that some people are running with it. Let me grab it.
He disappeared. That was wild. Ghosted out of existence.
I know, right? So this one I found because I wanted to be able to run my laptop in the field, and I have a Microsoft Go 3, and it's a little temperamental when you're charging it. And so this one produces, I guess, 65 watts on the little USB-C. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little USB-C in
Hold
the
it in
middle.
front of your
But
face.
there we go.
It's
Nope.
it's showing us your background.
Is it? That's well. Let me
Yeah.
turn my background off. Hang on. I don't need it.
See the
It's not
I
bunker.
thought maybe if you held it directly in front of your face, it would like, you know, give it up. But no, it just made your face go away.
Not like there's anything special behind me. So that's what that looks like. And it's called a Muto. IMUTO is the name of it. I'm probably butchering that, but there's the USB-C in the middle that has a 65 watt output. And I tested it on my Surface and it seems to work, seems to charge it while it's on, which is what I was looking for. But apparently you need something with that amount of power output to charge or to power the Mini.
So what's the input on that Mini? Is it AC, DC?
The
I don't
Mini,
know what-
I believe, yeah, I think it's 12 volt.
Yeah.
Well, if it's 12 volt, then why not just bypass with a little battery pack and go straight to something like a lithium iron phosphate battery, put a little charger in the case, call it a day.
You probably
mean-
could.
I mean-
I was trying to find people online that were actually using the Mini out in the field. And so they had there were a few people that had recommendations. This was one of them. But yeah, you could probably do what you're saying. You'd have
Yeah.
to test everything out before you went out there, obviously.
Yeah. I only ask because, like, I noticed when you and I were comparing notes on the man packs we built, like, that was one of the big places you and I divorced was you were running, like, a little self-contained USB battery pack kind of, and I went straight to, like, a pretty decent-sized 10 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery with charger and everything built into it that sits in the bottom of that pack. I mean, if it works, it works. I was just curious.
I'm sure there's more than, one way to do it for sure. So, but this was one that someone had done and I was like, well, I'll give that a shot and see if it runs my laptop. And sure enough, it does. So, I guess if I did the Mini, I'd probably get one more of these. I mean, I have a few battery backups that I take with me. So
2025 and we don't have flying cars, but we do have backpack size internet hookups. Seems like a fair
Right.
trade.
Listen, and homeless people with iPhones. It
Yes,
is what it is.
that's equally impressive.
Better phones than I have.
For the way
You know
people
what I mean?
drive, I'm glad we don't have flying cars.
Yeah.
So,
But
you know,
when you started to get into as far as like getting your family and with the comms plan stuff, and I think one of the biggest things is to, it's amazing how many people don't even watch the news, and if you can show incidents happening where disasters are taking place and communications are being lost, it'll kind of just reemphasize your point as to, hey, this is why we need to have this in place. And you're not just, hey, let's just do this just because in the back of their minds, it's never going to happen here. Why do we have to have this thing? And I think if you can take advantage of that and show with real life examples of, current topics, then that makes the push that much easier.
fighting normalcy bias for sure.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. It's such a powerful psychological barrier. Even I've read accounts in the Twin Towers and the tower that hadn't been hit yet. People were still kind of milling about, like, I don't know, do you think we should get out? Like, that normalcy bias was so strong that it prevented people from evacuating a tower next to another tower that was like on fire from a jetliner.
But that's not surprising. That was real. And then with this, I actually had in text messages, people being like, "Hey, last night was really scary. They evacuated my friends of ours a couple streets over, but we didn't have to evacuate." It's like, well, wait a second. So you were scared. They're evacuating people. You can see the fire from your apartment, but because they didn't tell you to evacuate, you didn't. And that's one of those things where it's like people need to remember, like we can all think for ourselves. If
you can
feel you're in danger,
self-evacuate,
have your plan ready. Just go.
I think that fear of social shame also is huge. Nobody wants to look like the crazy sky is falling Chicken Little person. So I do kind of wonder if maybe some wives are hesitant to jump into the radio stuff because maybe they feel like their friends will judge them as, getting into some crazy survivalist thing. And it doesn't have to be crazy and survivalist. It just has to be part of your normal day, and it doesn't need to be some crazy stuff. Nobody needs to be slinging a rifle and wearing BDUs that you get from the surplus store to talk on a radio. You can just be a normal person talking on a radio. So,
but let me just say one thing about that whole wives being afraid of like social ostracism within their friends group. There was a time when my wife kind of fell into that group. Not horribly, like it was. She never fought me tooth and nail on preparedness. She never fought me tooth and nail a lot of these things. A lot of it was, you're my husband. I love you. I know you have our best interests at heart. If you think it's necessary, do it. I just don't want to look like an idiot in front of my friends, which was fair.
That's fair.
And over the years, she has definitely leaned more and more into the preparedness community and been much more outspoken and vocal and open about it with friends and coworkers and family and everybody else, because over the years, we've dealt with very small scale natural disasters, some not small scale, but we came out of the other side just fine because of the things we prepared ahead of time. So now she's in the boat of, we do these things, and I don't care if you think they're stupid. They've saved our bacon more than once. So it's one of those things where it's like, to both of y'all's point, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Normalcy bias is hard to fight. But it's one of those things where it's like, you can call me crazy because I'm preparing for a Cat 5 hurricane. You cannot call me crazy for preparing for the second Cat 5 hurricane, though, because the first time proves it could happen. Well, Hurricane Katrina, blew literally, at the time, I was living about 15 miles from where the eye wall went through. And Hurricane Ida was 10 or 15 miles away from my house. So that's two major Cat 4 hurricanes I've lived through in the last 20 years. So you can't call me crazy for preparing for the next one because I've already got two under my belt, guys. And the thing of it is that so does my wife. So now when everybody tries to give her flack about it, she's like, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ida, hurricane this, hurricane that, flood this, flood that. It's very easy to rebuff people when you've lived through those examples. And you can say, you might want to pray for good luck and hope for the best, but my family does things differently.
Well, and that's taking it to an extreme, saying you have to live, through a disaster to experience it. I think it would behoove people a lot to just take a drive into the mountains and lose cell service where you can't get it back. As far as your communications goes, then when you get that, they're actually looking at their cell phone with no service in SOS mode. You can be like, look, yeah, there are places in America where there is no cell coverage. We have to have some sorts of, backup communications in play.
You go 40, 50 miles to the west of me out in Shenandoah National Park. There's nothing out there as far as cell service.
Exactly.
Nothing.
Well, try to make a call in a busy area, like when a basketball game is playing, and just see your cell service drop to nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could even still be in an urban area and your infrastructure can get overwhelmed.
If you're ever sitting in traffic on the interstate somewhere, and like if the interstate's at a standstill or you're just crawling along if you notice, your internet connectivity gets really slow, and it's because all those people were there, and it's eating up bandwidth.
Yeah. The thing we've noticed after major hurricanes down here is that sometimes the cell service goes down because, the towers are all down.
Right.
Sometimes the problem isn't that the towers are down because most of them have backup generators. It's the fact that everybody and their brother and their uncle and their cousin is blowing up their cell phones, trying to reach out to family, trying to check on everybody. And the cell towers are, the entire
they're on Facebook. They're not reaching out to family. They're doom scrolling Instagram. You know it.
They are.
In the name of full disclosure, I'm 42 years old, so I lived through a substantial period of time where there was no Facebook on your phone. But yes, these days it's probably doom scrolling. I could say that for Hurricane Katrina. For Hurricane Katrina, there wasn't a lot of Facebook on your cell phones. There was a absolute ton of the cell service being just completely clogged. It was overwhelmed with the number of people trying to make calls. That's why we resorted to text messaging so much, because you could send a text message and after 2 or 3 attempts, you would get it up into the cellular service. And then if it had to kind of like cycle through there 7, 8, 9 times, and if it took half an hour to get down to whoever you sent it to, it would eventually make it. So
cell sites are only designed to have so many users connected to them at any one time.
Well, I think that's two big things you guys put there. Number one, people need to remember, in a disaster, when cell coverage is strained, text messages take a lot less bandwidth than it does to make a phone call. So if you need emergency comms, don't try to call somebody. See if you can get a text through. That's going to be your best bet. And number two, when we talk about, you're saying people scrolling and whatnot, that was one of the big things, back when I was up in New York, when we had the blackouts there, or when the hurricane hit, we had all the flooding in Lower Manhattan. And one of the issues there was, which was pretty funny, I had a buddy of mine that lived on Wall Street, and him and I were talking back and forth, and he was amazed because people were hiking down the 50, 60 or so flights of stairs using the flashlight on their phones to get down to where they had generators and stuff set up on a couple floors above the lobby to sit there and charge their phones. Then they would unplug it and walk back up their 50 or 60 flights to go back up to their apartment and sit there. Nobody had flashlights. Nobody had any sorts of communications other than their cell phone.
But I bet they had amazing legs after that.
Sure,
right?
But they were literally just it was just the zombie effect of, well, I need to have my phone charged for when the cell service comes back on. And
that's how we make America healthy again, right there. That's the plan.
So since you brought this up to my mind, this is a little Streamlight ProTac dual fuel, little bit flashlight, stays in my back pocket. And if you can't tell from the amount of anodizing worn off, this thing's been through hell and back, and it keeps on running. I keep this in my back pocket, and I work a white collar office job. And I have
the same one.
Yep.
Right there. I love it.
I've got one. I bought one for my wife and daughter as stocking stuffers, and I have a fourth one sitting in the safe just for when one of these things finally dies, but it hadn't happened yet. But I work in an office, and I've gotten so much crap from so many of my coworkers about the crazy prepper in the office who carries the flashlight everywhere, and why would you ever have one of those? I was in a class at a local community college on the second story of a building that was being renovated, and the power went out, and apparently the emergency lights had not been reconnected. So we're sitting in a classroom with no exterior windows. It's pitch black. Everybody's using the little bitty lights on their cell phones, and then Captain 300 lumens fires this thing up and illuminates the entire classroom and says, so do you want me to walk y'all out down the stairwell? I mean, I could take about, 10 at a time. And I got everybody down the stairs and out the door safely and came back up, grabbed the next group, and just walked them up and down. Never heard another word out of any of them about why do you carry a flashlight.
Well,
it's just so sad that people...
Go ahead.
I'm just remarking that it's sad. It actually makes me really sad to hear that people would be so nasty to someone for a very simple personal preparedness activity that doesn't affect or hurt anyone else. It shouldn't even make them feel uncomfortable.
But Drew, here's the conclusion I came to years ago. The reason so many people are so nasty about it is because if one person is doing something that nobody else is, there are two possible reasons for it. Either they're nuts or they're doing something you should be doing. So to guard a person against admitting I should be doing what that person's
That's
doing,
shame.
they have to ridicule what the other person is doing. That's a conclusion I came to years ago.
Can it be a
Because
little bit of both?
I think that's a binary thing, honestly.
Yeah.
Just because, like, in my own personal life, like, my wife and I have had, like, friends that we don't really deal with anymore who used to be very derisive towards me they were derisive towards my wife about me, about why does your husband do this and why does he do that and why does he do that? And it was this constant barrage of, you live with a crazy prepper. And my wife asked me, like, it doesn't affect them. Why do they care? And I'm like, because if the power goes out, we're taken care of. If we can't go to the grocery store for 6 months, we're taken care of. If the water supply goes to hell in a handbasket, we're taken care of for 30 days. Like, we have all these things to guard ourselves against emergencies, because I don't like having to tell my wife and daughter, you get to starve because we can't go to the grocery store. And they don't. So they're going to convince themselves we're the crazy ones, so they don't have to admit they should probably be doing the same thing. Sorry, Taylor, you were going to say something, and I think.
Well, no, it's just the fact, here's the thing, as goofy as it sounds, people can say they want, because yes, your cell phone does have a flashlight, but we stress, and everybody, especially here, admits to the fact of communications in any disaster type situation is one of the most primary important things you need to establish. Now you are taking your primary communications tool, but it's also your primary navigation tool, because you need the GPS on it, or the mapping program, to use as a flashlight. And you talk about something that's going to drain the battery on an iPhone. The flashlight's probably one of the biggest drainers there is.
It's like having a flashlight on your Baofeng.
Thanks for that reminder. Has anybody ever used a flashlight on their radio?
No,
Like,
not on purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
On accident. Yeah, you're right.
I go back to professional radios don't have flashlights. None of them do. So this should probably tell you something right there.
But apparently, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So
Yeah, it's a question of.
So the irony here is they do carry a flashlight and they do carry a radio, because a cell phone is a radio. And especially if they've got one of the new iPhones and can talk to a satellite, now they've got a super nerdy radio. You fucking nerd. What are you doing carrying one of those things? It's just so ironic.
I'm gonna tell you that when my wife and I were faced with the decision of getting these not cheap iPhone 15 Pros, or getting like the older 14s or the 14 Pros for a substantial discount, the fact that they were integrating satellite communication was a huge seller for me.
Sure, and I wasn't remarking that that's bad. It just is ironic that somebody would call you a nerd or make fun of you for having a flashlight. I think you're crazy, but they literally have one on their cell phone, and their cell phone is a radio.
I'm emotionally at peace with it.
It's funny though, and everybody's, and people have to realize though too, the cell phone with satellite capability is not the end all be all in your communications plan. And my biggest thing with that is using that Starlink in the Klamath Mountains. Those are some steep mountain faces.
You still have to have line of sight to the satellite.
And that's what I was going to get to, is the fact of there are many a times where it's like, hey, we have no cell coverage or no satellite today, like no web internet today, because we are not in an area where we can see the sky, or at least we're not on the right side of the sky. And there are many roads, if you're driving through there, where the face of the mountain that you're driving on, it lasts for miles and miles and miles. So if you break down or have an emergency right then and there, even though your cell phone can do satellite, you still may not be able to reach it.
Or if you do have an emergency, you might have to hike 2 miles or 2,000 feet up on top of the ridge line to be able to get satellite service to your Starlink.
Absolutely.
Or to your iPhone 15 or 16, whatever it is.
Well, yeah, and just as a slight sidebar, like, this was one of the things that really jumped out at me when I joined the GMRS community, was there were so many people who were surprised when they would say, oh, I tried to transmit, I couldn't reach this repeater, I couldn't this, I couldn't that, it was really scratchy. And the first thing they get told is, did you try walking around a little bit? And that is the most mind-blowing blind spot for most people that are brand new to radios, is like, what do you mean, did I walk around a little bit? Like, shouldn't this thing just work? And I'm like, no. I can walk 10 feet and see my, and listen to my reception on my radios, and it improves or goes away dramatically. It's one of those things where it's like, yes, to y'all's point, the fact that the iPhone has a reasonably robust cellular capability, it now has a as yet unproven satellite communications capability, is really all kind of irrelevant. If the fact of the matter is, if you're having an emergency right here, and it never occurs to you, if I walk 100 feet that way, I might get reception, whereas I don't have where I'm at. I mean, you could just shrug your shoulders and call that user error, but I mean, to me, that's like a training thing. I think honestly, it's a lot of just people have become so accustomed to these things working in major metro areas where you do get cell service almost everywhere, that we just have to reteach people that sometimes, guys, you're gonna have to walk around a little bit. You're gonna have to hold the phone just right. You might have to find high ground. We're gonna have to start relearning like some of the lessons our forefathers knew back before cell phones were as ubiquitous as they were.
You might have to stand on one leg with your hand on top of your head and pat your belly and
tinfoil around that antenna.
Right.
Don't knock it if it works.
Let me ask you guys this: when I did that last video, talking to the guy who lives in LA who was affected by all this, for him and his wife were doing security patrols, and rightfully so, because they had the means, were capable in the whole 9 yards. But they were using GMRS to coordinate these patrols around their community.
Awesome.
When he was explaining that to me, though, my mind right away went to encryption. You're doing essentially, security, some sort of, ad hoc law enforcement for a disaster area. You probably shouldn't have your stuff just out there for anyone and everyone to hear. So got my mind going. I'm like, should there be something, or what would what are the thoughts are that if you had the ability to run some sort of encryption over a GMRS channel in that type situation? I think it's personally feasible and okay and acceptable for what you're dealing with, kind of situation dependent.
My trigger for that is life safety. If I think it's necessary for life safety, I absolutely will do it, and I'll do it for the shortest amount of time possible to maintain life safety, and then I'll return back to non-encryption once the rule of law is restored. But I think it very clearly from the news reports we saw out of that area, the rule of law was not in effect. It was a lot of looting, and the emergency services were overwhelmed with handling the fire. So I think it's absolutely justifiable. Begin crucifying me in the comments now.
No, that's where mine went to, and I also went back to, as well as Hurricane Helene. A lot of the issues were coming out of there was the fact of, I mean, Drew, you and I, we're very familiar with HIPAA, but a lot of people are not. So now you have people literally doing the right thing, helping any which way they can, and there is vital information that's very, very personal and private, but it has to be communicated right then and there. So, it's just another example to me where, like, that's probably a thing, even if it's on a handband, where encryption is appropriate.
I would agree. I believe there is a carve out in HIPAA for operational necessity. Like if you had a reason, a compelling operational need to even say social security numbers over the airwaves for whatever reason, whatever that looks like, I think that's justifiable. But I agree, you should maintain that privacy under.
I'm not saying they did anything wrong by doing it. I'm just saying, since it's something that we can now look at and go, hey, not only could this happen, it has happened.
For anybody listening who doesn't know what that is, it's the Law, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act that governs a lot of the privacy regulations that we fall under as healthcare providers. So that's what he's referring to.
Back when I worked for the police department in Nevada there, we used to read people's date of birth, names, date of birth, social security numbers, everything right over the air. And it wasn't encrypted. This was back in the 90s. We even did that here in Virginia. Wasn't as common here, but you can gain a lot of information. Not that it's a HIPAA thing, but it's very similar. That you're putting out personal information.
So not even glancing over the issue of like HIPAA or personal information, but just thinking about this more from like a military, like operational security issue. I'm not opposed to encryption at all. I always go back to the idea that like anytime I'm going to engage encryption, I'm going to assume it's being penetrated because that's just there's no reason to talk there's no reason to talk over the radio with the assumption that your communication is 100% secure. That is a recipe for a bad day later on. What I always encourage people to do is to like consider the content of the message, to develop a method of communicating with a comms plan with the people you're communicating with, so that what you're communicating doesn't have a lot of value to the people who don't know what you're trying to communicate. You know what I'm saying? Like simple things like if I'm on this street and I'm on this street, I wouldn't say over the open airwaves, I'm on this street. I would say I'm at my position or I'm on my street. That way, everybody else who's on this comm plan knows Phil is on Avenue A. So when he says he's on his street, he's on Avenue A. It's all about like make sure that the content of the information you're putting out in the airwaves is not useful to anybody else. There's no intelligence to be gathered from it. There's no way to identify where you're at based on what you're communicating to the degree that it's possible.
And if you're using encryption, it's going to be within a closed group.
Yeah,
of just a few
It
individuals.
Ideally,
depends on what
should have
method
some
you're using
sort of
too.
idea of what you guys are trying to portray.
Yeah, I
limiting
mean, if you're
power
gonna-
output too. Limiting your power output would
Yes.
also limit the range of people who could potentially intercept and decode your signal as well.
No, that's
gonna-
a big one. And Phil, I definitely agree with what you're saying. And my thoughts, so, in a case like that where you are essentially now the security force for your neighborhood, well, when, Cheryl at, 310 Main Street says, hey, I think there's something in my backyard, there's no other way to let you know than to say, hey, I need you to go to Cheryl's house or 310 Main Street to go check that out. So, not anybody listening knows it's where you're headed to.
But if
Yeah.
you're going to do something like that, you need to plan this stuff out in advance because some of your success is going to be dependent on what encryption method you're using. So if you're using like 256-bit encryption, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're using something that's lesser, can people potentially break that if they know what they're doing? Sure. But I mean, I don't think anyone, off the street's really going to be able to just break that on the fly either, even if it's a lesser encryption method.
Well, I mean, the average person isn't even going to be carrying a radio to be able to hear what you're pumping out into the airwaves. If we're talking about grab 100 people off the street, put your hand up if you have a GMRS or a ham radio or even an FRS bubble pack radio, I'm going to bet you get about 10 out of the 100 max. If we're talking about ham radios and somebody really knows how to use them, maybe 2 out of 100. So the likelihood that anybody's going to be listening is already fairly low.
Sure.
But the thing I always talk about when we talk about like security in any guise, whether it's radio, whether it's internet, whether it's PII, anything, the likelihood that your countermeasures can be penetrated is wholly dependent on who's trying to do it. So one of the things we talk about a lot in information security is the idea that like, if I want to keep my information, say, from Taylor, all I have to do is create something that's sophisticated enough to stop Taylor. I don't know what your abilities are. But with off-the-shelf security software and some basic safeguards, and a firewall, I can probably keep you out of my stuff. But if the United States of America, if the CIA wants into my laptop, I might as well give them the daggone password because they've got 2,000 computer nerds in a room that'll break my stuff wide open no matter what I do with it.
Did you guys watch the video I sent out this morning?
I did not.
Terrifying, absolutely terrifying, and that's the only word I have for it.
It is. It's pre-encryption espionage.
So he's talking about AI. Everybody's phones now have Google Gemini, or what is Apple's version of it?
Intelligence.
That stuff's reading your screen. So you might have end-to-end encryption, but if that can read your screen and report it back to a database, you now no longer have encryption. It's brilliant.
And
I didn't even think about it, and it's terrifying.
It's very terrifying. Even as far as images go, pictures that you take with your camera on your phone. It's not necessarily transmitting that image, but it's transmitting the raw data that image produces.
Well, Edward Snowden tried to warn you guys.
Yeah. Reading
You think he'll
everything
get
he
a? You
released
think he'll
is
get a
frightening.
pardon?
No.
And I know
mean,
we
they
said
let
so.
Ross
I said we
Albright out,
would.
so
I said we would
maybe.
do an hour, between an hour and a half. So we'll keep to that. Looks like we are going to go slightly over. So really, I guess that kind of segues into our next topic, which is politics, the incoming administration. There's been a ton of stuff that's happened in the last, day. One of them is just all of the sweeping executive orders. One of them was the release of all the JFK files, also the MLK, RFK files.
Well, those were all in World Trade Center 7.
Indeed. And then, there's going to be some court fights over the birthright citizenship thing. It looks like a judge has tried to block that. U.S. Senate confirmed Ratcliffe as the director of the CIA. Speaking of the CIA, I guess Marco Rubio is going to be our Secretary of State.
I heard Pete Hegseth finally got confirmed.
That was supposed to be tonight. Did that happen?
I haven't confirmed it, but I saw it in my social media feed right before I jumped on with y'all.
Yeah, that was one. And then, sorry, I'm just kind of Alex Jonesing it here. I guess the thing that's going to come up as far as foreign affairs will be whatever Trump negotiates with the Russians over Ukraine. There's the issue of pardoning all of the 1,500 J6 defendants. And, of course, Biden's last-minute pardons, which has created kind of a buzz. So there's been quite a bit of news going on, but I don't know. What do you guys think of the incoming administration so far and some of the things that have happened?
I think exactly what I did his first term. I think some of the things he's going to do are probably going to give me a brief smile, and some of them are probably going to piss me off and be the subject of very, very energetic and passionate ranting on my own podcast. I mean,
think a lot of it's tit for tat between him and the other administration.
That happens with every time this country changes from one political party to another based on the whim of the electorate. I guess what I'm saying is, like, he's a man, he has a platform. Some of it I do and don't agree with, and at the end of the day, I'm going to do exactly what I told people I was going to do when Biden got elected, when Trump got elected the first time, when Obama got elected, and so on and so forth, is going back to before I was even political. I'm going to focus on the things that are within my control. I'm going to continue to take care of my family and plan for retirement, and, not feed into the hysteria that the sky is falling because the orange man is back in the White House. But I'm also not going to rush out and sell off all my preps and start giving away ammo because the orange man's in the White House.
That's my fear. I'm afraid that people are going to become too relaxed because they think that they're safe now and stop preparing and stop training, stop planning.
Historically, almost every time there's a Republican in the White House, or the sentiment is amongst the government is mostly conservative, you do see slowing firearm and ammunition sales. You do see slowing sales of things that are like traditional prepper staples. You see that, like that's history. That's always happened. The only thing that's probably going to short circuit that this time around is that amongst that group that is terrified of Donald Trump taking power, I'm seeing, because I surf Reddit and I crawl around the dark corners of the internet where people think they're only speaking to themselves, and I use it like an intelligence gathering apparatus. It's quite entertaining to lurk places. But I'm seeing this huge groundswell among traditionally like lefty liberal people that are dead set that they need to buy guns and they need to buy ammo and they need to start buying emergency food and they need to start doing all this stuff that the conservatives and the preppers have been doing for all these years because they think the end of the world is coming. And I'm here for it because I'm just like, there is no downside to all these people arming up and getting training and buying ammo.
One of the things I was wrong about,
to it.
I thought that there was going to be some level of violence leading up to the election and after, depending on who won. None of that really happened.
Though. It
is cold outside, but none of that really happened. I don't know if that means that it's not going to happen, or maybe it'll happen during the spring or summer. But with as much of a big deal that they made about him being an existential threat and, you know, all this stuff, like it's been pretty mild.
Sedate.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think America's any less of a tinderbox than it was in 2020. So we're probably just waiting for some sort of catalyst to kick off the next summer of love. That's
So
just
is
my
it flipped
assumption.
now? All the
Could
all
be
the
another George Floyd incident that'll kick it off, or something similar.
Yep.
I don't even think we have to worry about that, because we're in a whole other a whole other world as far as law enforcement goes, and viewpoints on that. My whole thing is, for the last 40 years, I think we're all pretty much agreeing that with the influx of people into this country that are unvetted, we don't know who they are, all these foreign nationals that have come in. I think we're all pretty much in agreement to the fact of a lot of them are here, or at least a percentage of them are here for a reason, and it's not to better their lives. You know what I mean? They are essentially operatives from other countries. And I think the issue with Trump getting into office is the fact that they now feel like they're backed in the corner. When you see these ICE raids coming out, these people being deported, I think people have realized the fact of that they very well maybe have started their stopwatch, and that the countdown is coming. So it's act now, or we may be out of time. And I think you may actually force people into
action.
in action. Exactly.
That's possible, but honestly, my standpoint is better to force them into action now than wait till they double or triple their numbers. Like
100%.
at the end of the day, the risk of this country being invaded and attacked, even though a lot of people will bristle at the idea of like the United States being invaded, but I don't know what you call this many people pouring over our border, except an invasion. But to me, it's like that risk was always there. And either we deal with it proactively and we deal with it in a way that we limit our exposure to it. Either we harden our citizenry and we prepare them to deal with emergency situations, or we just sit back with our belly exposed and wait for it to happen. I'm not in favor of the latter. I just feel like, could there be some unexpected fallout from that? Sure. 9/11 happened. We've had terrorist attacks in this country before. We're going to have them again. There's no trying to stop that is like trying to stop sunshine tomorrow morning. Our better bet is for everybody to get out the umbrellas and get out the sunscreen, because we're going to have to learn to live with a certain amount of civil unrest in this country, or any country. It's a fact of life.
So Summer Side of Life says, well, I'll just say this. I'm in Western Canada. I am somewhat surprised that the Canadian YouTube police are allowing me to see this stream. And here we can't have or stock ammo or weapons, I guess.
Yeah, I'll be right back, guys.
I really hope that you all are able to vote out the Liberal government and vote in.
Well, Trudeau's
some more.
leaving. Isn't he
I don't know if
resigning?
that doesn't really mean anything in Canadian politics, right? They have to vote out the Liberal coalition that put him into power, right? And maybe our commenter there can enlighten us more, because I'm not totally versed in Canadian politics, but I think it's going to take some serious change in their next election to actually make any change. And what kills me is that the Canadians seem to have forgot that the Earth is roughly ball-shaped and that they're next door neighbors to Russia. So if they're really, really concerned for what Russia is doing to its neighbor Ukraine, but then they decide that they're going to disarm their population and give all their weapons to Ukraine, they seem to not care at all about what Russia might do to their next door neighbor, Canada. And I think the shortest distance between Canada and Russia is like 1,200 miles. It's a hop, skip, and a jump under that Arctic ice cap, please.
Well, I was going to say that I do have a small contingency of family that are Canadians. And what I have noticed, well, first of all, like I personally believe, and I don't know if y'all believe it, that like politics is downstream from culture. What if the culture pushes one direction, politics is going to stubbornly follow it sooner or later. That is the entire reason I think that Donald J. Trump's back in the White House, because culture dictated politics go that direction or else. But what I see from the Canadian culture is that like the idea that people should be armed and have a right to use arms against other human beings and their own self-protection, that in and of itself is a very foreign concept to many parts of that culture.
Trudeau made the statement that Canadians do not have a right to armed self-defense.
But herein lies the problem. Trudeau is a pinhead. If 80% of that country said,
When there's
"F
100
you,
pinheads lined up behind him.
There,
Sorry, I'm
there's the
sorry.
problem. No, but that's the problem. The problem is, look, I had this exact same conversation with friends who were screaming and yelling about, Barack Obama and the policies he was pushing, and I said the problem is, if you look at the voter registration, he's not the problem because there's so many tens of millions of people that voted for him and they agree with him, and that's the problem we have
Right.
here is that the majority of Canada agrees enough with civilian disarmament that it's going to be a reality. And it's going to continue to be a reality until a majority of that country says this is bull and starts pushing back. And that is not a political change. That's a cultural change. And the politics will follow.
Do you
Get some is spot on.
That's the
Do
whole
you
reason
agree
why
with
since the
Jay
1980s.
that Canada has gotten used to protection from the United States?
Yes, and here's why. Canada has 4 submarines. For their massive coastline, they have 4 submarines. They have like less than 80 tanks for their entire landmass. They have 50 or 60 fighter jets. Some of the surface ships in their tiny, infinitesimally sized surface navy are actual fucking sailboats.
Well, compared to us,
What are they
I
doing?
mean,
And so their only real deterrent to a full-scale invasion from their next door neighbor Russia, which they are very concerned about, was their armed population that would have been difficult to subjugate. But now even that doesn't exist. So yes, I think that is absolutely spot on. They are just way too reliant on the idea of America coming in and saving the day.
a lot of people are, though. I mean,
Most of Europe is.
yeah, I mean, but the comparison is always, someone else's military against ours. We spend a lot of money on the military. We spend a lot of money on defense. We spend a lot of money on
Sure, like $1 trillion a year, something like that, right?
it-
Okay, well, Cuba has like 1,500 tanks. And Canada is how many times
run?
the size of Cuba, and they have like less than 100. They have like 70 or 5, something like that.
I would also posit that we could probably reduce our military budget quite a bit if we weren't invested in defending most of the rest of NATO around the world.
Right.
Like,
Well, that was one of Donald Trump's arguments, that other countries were not pulling their weight and allocating what they agreed to as far as the certain percentage of their GDP towards basically supporting NATO. So, I mean, it is true that a lot of these countries have gotten used to Big Brother protecting them, I suppose.
well, but funding NATO isn't even the issue. Like, we should not be funding NATO. We don't need them. They don't do anything for us. But funding NATO is not the issue here. The problem is, if it were not for U.S. military bases and freaking carrier strike groups around the world keeping peace, most of these other countries couldn't defend themselves from a bunch of angry sailors in rowboats. The fact of the matter is, our military is as large as it is and requires the level of funding it does because we are being the police for the entire world. If we brought all those military assets back home and said, F y'all, we're here to take care of ourselves, first of all, Russia would invade half of Europe tomorrow. And China would invade Taiwan would be a Chinese satellite state by the
Are any of you in favor of being isolationists? I guess we kind of used to be, around World War I, but are you
No.
in favor of that again?
I'm in favor of being more isolationist than we are.
What does that mean?
Okay.
Quit poking our noses in where it doesn't belong.
There. So I espouse libertarianism as a spectrum of ideas. Like, the idea that there can be no government is not libertarian. That's anarchy.
Mhm.
A libertarian means we should have less government because too much government does stupid stuff. And I look at isolationism versus interventionism as a spectrum. It's not, the answer is not binary, all intervention or all isolation, but it's, we're way over here. We should be closer to this side. So,
but we also don't want to go back to the point where we had a Continental Congress that was ineffective government.
Yes. So I guess what I'm saying is like, to your point, we stick our to Jared's point, we stick our noses into too many other countries' business. We operate way too many friggin' military bases in foreign soil that we should be turning over to those countries to deal with their own problems. I'm not saying don't help our allies and our neighbors. I'm just saying that if we are as broke as this country is, and we're broke, we've been running a deficit my entire life, then we probably need to start making some hard decisions about helping our neighbors when we can't even feed ourselves.
I think that's fair. Absolutely. I mean, the amount of money we spend on embassies worldwide is just astronomical. And, I think that there's certainly areas where we can cut, where we can, I guess, like they say, charity starts at home. So
Wasn't
Yeah.
Trudeau
Well,
supposed to go away by now?
wasn't what?
Trudeau, wasn't he supposed to go away by now?
I don't know when he's supposed to officially leave. I just read
I
somewhere
was listening when I was off
that
camera. There.
yeah, I don't know, maybe when you guys can look it up, but supposedly he was supposed to resign soon. But
Yeah, somebody's in y'all's comments warning against isolationism. Like, I'm not saying
I agree.
fully isolationist. I'm just saying that, like, this country has wrestled over the years with this idea of, do we get involved overseas or do we not? And we've been at both extremes. And I feel like right now we're over at one extreme. We need to have a much more reasonable, much more measured idea of what interventionism means to this country. And it has to, at some point, be based, like, even if we're not going to make a moral argument for interventionism, we need to at least make an economic argument for it. Like, if we're expending trillions of dollars in defense budget and we're not creating a safer country, I'm going to go right back to what I said about FEMA over an hour ago. If it ain't working, then make it work right. But
well, I think it's probably a delicate balance between how much money we spend on defense and all these things, and what Get Some J's saying, where he's saying he's part of or retired special intelligence wing, and that more threats exist than people know. I think that's certainly valid, but where's the balance between the $1 billion that we spend every year and like you said, balancing our budget?
Yeah,
where's that middle ground?
I argue if we can't balance our budget, then nothing else we're doing makes sense at this point.
I would just like our policymakers, before they send people into war, to ask themselves, is this situation worth our friends and children, an entire generation, being killed, having their arms and legs blown off, being psychologically scarred for life? And maybe sometimes that answer is yes, but in most cases, I would be willing to bet the answer is no. And so I think, careful.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, careful, bud. You're starting to sound a lot like me.
Indeed.
So I mean, in that case, I think what you're describing as being less interventional is probably virtuous, but not isolationist. I don't think that's wise. In this situation, in a hypothetical where Canada is invaded and occupied, I don't think America could just stand by at the Montana border and say, well, don't you try that over here, because now Canada becomes a massive staging ground for resources to take that next step. So
yeah, like I said, there are situations in which I am emotionally at peace with intervention, and helping one of our neighbors and one of our allies is certainly well within bounds. But what I'm not in favor of is parking a carrier strike group perpetually off the coast of Canada as a reminder to Russia not to play FAFO. Because there's got to be a point at which the response, the deterrent, doesn't put us in the poorhouse.
So this is a response or an answer to Jared's question if Trudeau was still around. So I guess he's still in power, and they're going through a vote for a new leader. Apparently, Carney might get in, and he's worse than Trudeau. So I feel
Politics
for you guys.
is downstream of culture, guys.
It is.
Careful what you wish for type thing.
And we're a little over our hour and a half, so we'll wrap it up here in a minute, but we got time for one more comment. So Yard Cell says, since World War II, our doctrine was the ability to fight 2 major wars at once.
Yeah, and in the process of implementing that doctrine, we have devalued our currency and bankrupted our country to a degree that our founding fathers would have just screamed at. George Washington would have handed this country back to the British if I could go back in a time capsule 250 years and show him what happened.
Or he just would have agreed to become king.
Might have. He might have come to the conclusion that
They wanted him to. They wanted him to be the king. But
Yeah. God bless him for being an idealist, though. He thought we deserved a chance to screw it up all by ourselves.
The
he
thing
really
is, though,
was
that-
the best one.
that the whole, the fact that we're bankrupt as a result of that is not out of necessity. When you look at all of the fluff that has been added to the government and the military that is not needed, essentially, if you made the military tomorrow outfitted by private contractors and they could get rid of all the red tape, you could fight 2 wars and fund it properly and it'd be effective. But where we have gotten ourselves to this point with the amount of, red tape we've created on our own and just the useless, worthless, members that are in there and things that they do.
Tell us what you really feel.
Yeah, I'm holding a lot back. But you
Come on, they'll just print more money and raise
going
the
with
debt
that.
ceiling and create more loans. That's all.
What could go wrong?
If the United States military was like, nope, we are a war fighting machine, period, and that's all we had to do. That's our military, which is what it's supposed to be. We would be fine, but we're not that.
Hey, before we go, could our Canadian friend in the audience settle something for me? Is Trudeau white or black? I saw some pictures and I wasn't quite sure. Is he a black man?
The answer to both questions is yes.
Yes.
Whatever is
okay.
politically convenient.
It's whatever he identifies as.
Well, I mean, hell, we've got white ladies and Puerto Ricans and everybody else that are freaking black in our country. So I mean, it's well within bounds.
White girl.
All right, we'll end with this one. Summer Side of Life says he's a white girl. So, all right, I'll take your word for it.
Thank you.
Since you live in that area. Well, with that, yeah, we're just slightly over, but we did pretty well. Thank you all you guys for joining. And with that, Phil, I guess we'll start with you. You have anything that you would like to wrap up with?
Not just that, March 8th, Southeast Louisiana, Cypress Survivalists is going to be putting on our first event. We're going to do about an 8-hour one-room schoolhouse type of thing where we're going to give everybody in the local community a brain dump on preparedness. And we're staying very far away from like EMPs and nuclear weapons and zombies and silly stuff. We're going to talk about really practical subjects for us, which is like hurricane preparedness, because it happens every stinking year for a reason. And yet, oddly enough, there's a lot of people in the local community that just their whole preparedness plan is a flat of water and a bag of potato chips. So I'm just like trying to get people in this area to come up a little bit on speed and try to improve their preparedness so that they can take care of themselves, take care of their neighbors, and not be screwed the next time hurricane smacks us upside the head. Although if the weather continues to do what it has been doing, I'm probably going to have to start doing some snow preparedness, seminars too.
Indeed. Awesome. Taylor, how about you?
No, not too much. I think I've already got a couple topics in my head for where we could go for the next live, but we'll
Awesome.
talk about that in the messages. Yeah, as far as ranch strategies goes, I can tell you right now, we just booked a TECC class. We'll be in North Jersey in May, and then we'll be in Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio between now and July. So if you're in any of the areas, shoot us an email, info@ranchstrategies.com. We're doing our the tactical rescue technician course, which is a ropes course, of course, the canine med course, and then anything in between. We're actually doing our live fire med class, the Michigan SWAT conference. So I always tell people, hey, any training that you're interested in, if you're like, hey, I'm interested in this type of class, if we do it, great. If not, I will send you to the best guy that I know of to get you that training.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Drew, and then Jared will give you the last word.
I'm Drew. I run the Terminal Element channel on YouTube. Come on over. I'd love for you to come and thumbs down all my videos and tell me what an idiot I am in the comments. By the way, I love Canada. I absolutely love your music. I love your culture. I do not want you to become a state and vote in our elections. I want you to be your own thing and strong and autonomous. So over to you, Jared.
All right. I'm Jared with Two Alpha Solutions channel. Canada's military, I think, has some awesome camouflage CAD PAT, and they just came out with new stuff. So other than that, on my channel, I'm going to be doing some radio direction finding videos here coming up soon.
Cool.
This is the Kraken RF SDR. Right now I'm tracking the the local airport AWAS frequency. I was really hoping to have some videos done in the past couple weeks after recovering from my surgery, because I didn't have anything else better to do, but I didn't leave the house much. And then this week I was feeling pretty good, and it got down to like 10 degrees here, so I didn't do anything outside. But hopefully in the next couple weeks I'll get some videos made on that, and also do some regular manual direction finding too. I got some RF loop antennas with the 4 megahertz offset attenuator. Be doing some videos on how to manually direction find, as well as using the SDR type.
You can do some fox hunting with that for sure.
Exactly. So I use the local airport one just because it's a constant transmitter, and there's some other frequencies around that I can use. It's just kind of fun. You know, it's a known location you can verify, and then once I do that a few times, I'll go out and I'll set a transmitter out somewhere, or have somebody go out and set one up somewhere, and I'll go out and try to find it. So pay attention to my channel, and hopefully I'll get some videos out here in the next couple weeks on that. Excellent.
Well, I appreciate all you guys. Thank you for coming on. Also, thank you to everyone in the comments section, as well as our mods. You guys are great, just helping moderate and keeping us on task. But with that, I guess we're about done. So if you guys want to stick around, I'll close this out, and then we can chat in a moment.